Thanks for joining us today on the Big Oak Land Podcast. Today we're going to be joined by a Texas cattleman and rancher by the name of Mr. Wayne Cockrell. Mr. Cockrell is very knowledgeable about the New World screw fly and is going to talk to us today about implementations and corrections that we can make in our own practices to help stockmen across the country and especially the Southeast. Tune in today for a very insightful conversation about how we can prevent the spread of the New World screw fly. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, today we're joined by Mr. Wayne Cockrell. Did I pronounce that right?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
He joins us today from southeast or southwest Texas.
Yeah, it's kind of East Central, College Station.
Okay, so you're just outside of the Pine Curtain.
And just outside the Pine Curtain. Absolutely.
I got you. In my part of the country, I'm from East Alabama and West Georgia, and we're right in the Pine Belt. So it's probably you're right on the transfer there to the.
Absolutely. Yes, I've spent the last 25 years right on the edge of the Pine Curtain, as you say, literally.
Well, Mr. Cockrell, for our listeners, please give us a little bit of your background and what you've done in your past and what capacity that we're speaking with you today.
Okay. I guess I'm an 8th generation Texan, and happy to say I've got grandsons that are now 10th generation Texans, and so I've been here a long time. Family has always been in the ranching livestock business. I grew up in a little town called Lomita, which is kind of west central Texas, kind of the heart of Texas there. Cow, calf, sheep and goat, hill country, northern hill country ranching operation. Went to college out in San Angelo, Texas at Angelo State University, married a San Angelo girl. And so I have a lot of friends and family that are currently in infested zones out there. So certainly getting a firsthand experience on that from the New World screwworm perspective.
I did quite a bit of hunting around San Angelo, Rio turkey hunting in that part of the country.
Yeah, absolutely. So you know the part of the world that's in the bullseye right now. And,
yes, sir. We hunted actually right around. Forgive me if I pronounce it wrong, but it was one of these fundamentalists. It was at the.
Oh yeah, they're at El Dorado. They're at the LDS. Sir. Yeah,
yes,
the LDS deal. You bet. Slacker County, and
Slacker County is right where I was, and I hunted, and I hunted for about 2 weeks there, and I could peer over with my binoculars, and that was right before the hatch blew off that whole instant there.
Wow. Yeah, it was quite a deal. And that is the latest infested zone in Texas is right
really
there.
That's crazy that
you know where Ground Zero was at.
I've been on that ground before and hunted, and it's a whole lot of different ground than my part of the country. It's kind of like walking on the moon compared to some of this red clay here.
No doubt.
What brings us to this avenue today of you and I meeting is no doubt it's the New World screwworm. Sometimes it's confused as the screw fly, but as I've been corrected by so many people, it's the screwworm.
Yeah.
Tell me a little what's going on.
Screwworm fly. I've been corrected and been told it's a screwworm fly. So either way, we all know what we're talking about.
Yes, sir. In my part of the country, we had a bad bout with it. And I've heard some of the older folks in my family talking about how if the depression wasn't worse enough, then you had the screw fly or screwworm, and anything that had an open sore, whether it be you were calving or cutting calves, or anything that had an open sore, that if you just didn't immediately go to treating it, you had problems. And if it wasn't, you didn't starve enough from the depression, you had to go to the doctor and every day just to have something to get by.
Yes, sir. No,
I hope that we hear talk of it now and we see it in the markets. I saw it yesterday, which today is July the 24th, and my local sale is the Roanoke Stockyards in Randolph County, Alabama. And I could see, you heard the talk over the last year, and it's kind of been an issue. And as you well know, cows have been gangbusters. It's as high as I've ever seen it. Probably ever will see it in my generation. We think every next sale is on the way down, but I could kind of see a lull in some of the bids and some of the stuff coming off, and I, I feel like we'll get ahead of this thing through science and implementation. But I do feel like it is having some effect on our market. What are you seeing there in your part of the country on the ground?
You bet. Well, first of all, I'm going to flatly, let everybody know that I'm not a PhD or scientist or expert or so.
We just
Uh,
country folks talking country business.
Absolutely. I happen now to be serving as the second vice president of Texas Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association, which is Texas's state cattle affiliation. And how I guess I became second vice president is the last couple of years I've served as our committee chairman of our cattle health and well-being committee. And so as the chairman of that, had to get involved with this, but also from a personal standpoint, because just like you, I certainly remember all the way back, into the 70s when they were still dropping flies in Texas because it had not been eradicated out of Mexico. And so we were still having incursions coming. And so a lot of the preventative practices and that we did growing up, and you wonder, well, why when we're castrating, we're still spraying fearsome spray on there, and why do we calve during the winter time and things like that? Well, they go back to just what you're saying. Our grandparents and parents had to figure these things out because it was their livelihood, and a 20 or 30% death loss was something that they couldn't take that. They had to ride every single day and try to save every single animal. And so it's certainly something that, why do you get involved? Just like you, because it's important, because you understand the impact that it can have on our industry. As far as markets go, I'm going to say kind of there's two in that part of the world, or in Texas here, and in the part of the world where these infested zones have taken place is certainly is a lot of cattle, but it's also impacted the sheep and goat markets, and probably has impacted the sheep and goat markets more than the cattle market, just because 80 or 90% of the sheep and the goats that are raised now end up going to slaughter. And a lot of that slaughter occurs on the East Coast, all the way from New York, New Jersey, all the way down through the Carolinas, Georgia, and Florida. And Florida is a really big market for these lambs and goats. And these lambs and goats don't go to just a regular slaughter facility like we think in terms of cattle, where they go to a feed yard first, and then they're going to go into slaughter once they've been finished. These animals, as soon as they come off these ranches, they're in the pipeline to Tennessee or Florida, and they're going to be kind of commingled, warehoused in these groups, and then they're distributed out from there. And so those animals all go to slaughter and need to go to slaughter quickly. And as concerned as you guys should be, and you are, about this spreading to you, how it's going to spread to you is going to be by live animal movement, and so we certainly understand that the concerns of each of the states not wanting this to be, not wanting our problem to become y'all's problem. So, but the issue is, if those animals to move there, the requirements are for those animals to be treated with either an ivermectin or a doramectin systemic treatment. Well, the problem is then you have withdrawal issues, 28 to 35 days, depending on the product. And so those animals can't be slaughtered. So what the markets are running into then, if they want to come to Florida, they want to go to Georgia, they either have to be slaughtered within 72 hours if they're not treated, or if they're not going to be slaughtered within 72 hours, then they have to be treated with one of those systemics. And then you have a withdrawal days. And so those animals have to be put up, quarantined basically, and fed, and
And
taking
you
care
got
of.
stress and weight loss
Exactly. All
and
those
yield
things.
loss and less recovery.
Absolutely. And so the impact on that market is anywhere 25-30% when you look at the numbers going back to the 1st of June. Uh, certainly has had an impact. The first few weeks were worse, just because a lot of those states just shut off, all of the movement controls until they figured things out. And so it's come back a little bit. On the cattle side, it really hasn't had that big of an impact on the calf market as much as, some of these younger cows that come through the market and want to go back to the country. And so some of those cattle, if they if they're coming from an infested zone, and they've been treated, or they haven't been treated and they have to wait 48 hours, or just, some of the market has been a little bit softer on those animals. It looks like the calf market, some of that softness the last few weeks has also been to, a big sell off in the futures market as well. And I would say probably the biggest impact that it has had for the last year, if you remember right, every time there was a rumor that we had a case of it, the market would be down the limit, and which would, if you happen to be selling cattle at the sell barn that day, it sure impacted your market, and so,
Well, we all know markets, they move on noise, and whether or not it's
absolutely,
rumor
absolutely,
rumor or fact, has a
absolutely. Yeah.
it
So at
has a
least now
positive
that
or
it's
negative
here,
impact on all of us.
yeah. So now at least that it's here, we know it's here. Let's figure out what it is and what it isn't, and how it's going to impact our numbers. Because ultimately, uh, you know, if we're trying to rebuild our cow herd, what is the impact going to be on
That's
that?
interesting that you bring that up, and this is something I wanna note to our listeners, and you can probably shed a little more light on it than I can, but isn't it true that we're at as from a stocking, herd standpoint or a raising standpoint, our mama cows are down, more than they have ever been, historically.
Absolutely, yeah. We're at historically low numbers of numbers of
And when I
cows.
say mama
Yeah,
cows, I mean,
you bet. You bet.
a breed
That's
a breedable, she's
absolutely, absolutely.
offspring. And what are those numbers at now? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I know you have a good figure.
Oh gosh, and I don't have that off the top of my head as far as exactly what the cow herd numbers are, but I know and they are certainly the lowest that they've ever been, and part of that reason is because of the drought that we've had in
Yes, sir.
Texas, in Oklahoma, Kansas, and they're still having it up in the Wyoming, Montana, those areas there. Certainly,
It's
certainly,
interesting that you also bring up drought, because when we see these drought scenarios, it's a lot of times when families or older herds, they tend to say, "Hey, we're going into a drought scenario. Let's go ahead and monetize this, or while this market is good, let's have a complete sell off." And you see some of these older calvers that are, you know, they're getting put to market, and we have a shortage of replacements. And what
oh yeah,
scares me, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist or an alarmist, it's just I have to take it from my perspective of what I see in the Southeast is we have, and I love all aspects of the cattle industry, so I'm not picking on anyone. I think that everything that, you know, we're all affected by it and we're all part of it in some sense. But we see a lot of trader cattle in my part of the country because
mhm,
people are replacing, herd replacement, or we see patch trading, and we see smaller lots that are across the board in our area. And it seems like with the market getting so high, everybody wants 10 or 12 cattle, and they're not these big transactions that we're
right,
accustomed to. And so it seems like everybody with this market going crazy wants to kind of get in the cattle business, and you're seeing these bigger herds broke up. And it seems like you have a lot of, I would say, auxiliary movement of cattle that you don't necessarily see from market to market transfer. And when I say that, I'm talking, gooseneck type loads.
right,
I'm not talking pot loads. And
right.
and so you see a lot of hand to hand transfer that I don't think you're seeing more of it now, and now as this market is high, you're seeing more hand trading. and I feel like that's kind of what's had me scared, just from a practical standpoint of what I see with my own eyes here. I don't know if that has much bearing, but you mentioned the goat and sheep, and I've been told that you don't see it the fly across a large body of water, and they say kind of the Mississippi River is our western buffer or kind of our protection zone. But I know in Georgia and parts of the Carolinas and in Tennessee that they're more this bespoke meat market has gotten to be more of a thing, and
Yeah,
not gonna mention any names, but things that they say are organic are not necessarily organic, and I
no,
know that they move from the west to the east more so than they did 10 years ago.
absolutely, and
And
way
I
more than
don't
they did back
without
in the 50s and 60s.
without unwrapping that riddle, I think you hear what I'm saying.
Oh yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So, so you should be concerned because it doesn't
Yes,
matter.
and
It
that's
doesn't
why I
matter.
bring it up.
It doesn't matter how wide the Mississippi River is. It's not gonna be the fly flying. It's gonna
Mhm,
be movement on animals is how it's gonna get to you. And that's how it really happened even back in the 30s was, you know what, drought and you had cattle traded and back then they didn't even there was no movement controls. You
mhm,
just moved them. And so uh, you have every right to be concerned, and the concern is going to be with the movement for sure.
mhm.
So don't be thinking that this is a long ways from you, because 2 years ago this was a long ways from San Angelo, Texas.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, down in Central America there, and and it didn't get here with the natural movement of the fly. It
Well,
got with movement of animals.
if we look back in just this recent, scare, or I'd say within the last 2 years, can you give us a little history or, back up, because you would have seen it firsthand where you are, about how the sterile flies were implemented, and there was always talk about putting in another facility, and was it Guatemala or Panama? Or I know there's been a lot of discussion, and you know,
Yeah, I'd
my
love to.
listeners are more in Alabama and Georgia, so they really don't understand it. And I'm just have tried to be just stay vigilant, stay judicial about what you do, and be aware, not necessarily be an alarmist, but just keeping in mind of what the possibilities are and what's happened in the past.
Right. So in the past, in 1962, uh, a facility was completed at Mission, Texas, in Moorefield, and that facility, that first screwworm facility, was paid for. Uh, the federal government, it cost $6 million. The federal government put up $3 million. The state of Texas said we'll put up uh, $3 million, but the producers have to come up with $3 million in
Well,
Texas, Oklahoma, New
just
Mexico.
for food for thought, 6 million in 1962. I can get my boys to figure what would 6 million be for
Oh, add a
six.
couple
What
of
is the
zeros.
was
Yeah,
for inflation? What's the cost now?
yeah, and well, it's gonna cost us 750 million is what the estimated cost
That's
for
crazy.
down there, exactly. And so that facility was built, and you understand they had to build it and operate it, so they had to raise operational money too, and so that was done. That money that was raised by our producers was raised by people like my grandparents and other producers, and some of them gave $50 and some of them gave $5, whatever they had, they contributed, and they got it built in 8 months. And that facility produced 200 million flies per week. And we use winter. They use winter verse and those flies. So winter we'll get about 2/3 of the state of Texas. It'll freeze the fly back, and then they were able to concentrate those flies down in South Texas and in Mexico, and we eradicated in 2 years, 62 to 64. But the problem was they thought they could keep that 200 million flies and use a buffer zone between Mexico and the U.S.
Hmm.
And the cattle kept moving through there. So every year from 64 to 82, we kept having more cases of it. And so then they decided, well, we've got to eradicate this all the way down through Mexico to give us a bigger buffer. And so they built a facility in Tuxtla, Mexico, which is down in the kind of the Isthmus of Mexico there. They call it Tehuantepec, is where they built that facility. It produced 500 million flies per week. And those 500 million flies is what they used to eradicate it down from Mexico throughout Central America, down, and it got to Panama in the 90s. And they built a facility there in Panama and created an international agency called COPEG. And that's a joint international agency, U.S. and Panama. United States taxpayers pay 90% of the cost of building that and 90% of the operational. And they use that facility to produce about 20 million flies a week. And they use the Darien Gap and that 20 million flies as a buffer zone to keep it from coming back out of South America for the last 25, 30 years. That's been our barrier. And you can go back to COVID had some problems, had some disruptions in supply chain. People couldn't get to work.
Do you think maybe that's interesting you bring that up? I don't mean to interrupt, but could that have had some effect? Pandemic issues. Could this be like an aftershock of pandemic
It is. It
constraint?
started with COVID whenever people in Panama that worked for COPEG couldn't get to work, or what would happen if you lived in that western portion of Panama next to the Colombian border and you ranched there and you had a case of it. You called COPEG, they sent some people out to treat it, and they dumped flies in that area. So so basically for 20 or 30 years we just put out fires. Those flies in the treatment were to put out fires. Well, when all of a sudden they couldn't come to work because they locked Panama down to where you couldn't leave your town even. And then on top of that, right after that, we had, estimated 12 million illegal immigrants that came right through the Darien Gap and got on a bus and came north all the way to the United States. That had an impact as well on the movement of the fly. And once it jumped the Panama Canal, in 5 days, it was in Costa Rica. That's 600 miles. And that was all animal movement there.
Well, it didn't have to do anything but catch a busted container in the canal and follow it right on in.
Right. Yeah. So what also happened on that side of Panama was over the last few years, a lot of those trees have been deforested in that Darien region of Darien State. Would be, I don't know if you're familiar with the Kansas Flint Hills, where people turn cattle out. Well, the Darien Gap, rich volcanic soils, super, all these Brazilian forages that they planted there. That was where they would wean their calves. So a lot of that, their beef production there is grass fed. So they wean those calves.
See like big Sudan and pearl millet, those big hardy grass stocks.
Huge grasses that they developed in Brazil. And so those cattle are turned out there as yearlings, and then they're gathered back up. A yearling or 2-year-olds, 18 to 24 months old, put on open top bobtail trucks, most of them, and they'd go back east in the country of Panama, either to slaughter, or some of the smaller cattle, the younger cattle down in Panama, all the way from Panama throughout Central America. Mexico has their biggest packer is called Sucarne, and they built a lot of feed yards in that Monterrey, Mexico area, and those cattle are sucked northward, and most of that is for Mexico's domestic supply. And so what's different now than it was in the 50s and 60s? You have the market movement of cattle through Central America is headed north every single day, headed north. And what is our market here in Texas? It goes north. We go to the Panhandle, or we go to Kansas, we go to Nebraska. And so this screwworm, not only can it fly, but really importantly, how it moves is, in the wound of an animal, whether that's wildlife or it's domestic animals that are being moved.
You mentioned something that I kind of took a mental note on. You mentioned winter calving. In the Southeast, a lot of producers follow, fall and spring calving. Was winter
Mhm.
calving a product of trying to
Yes.
combat the screw fly in
Yes, it was.
your
Yes, it was.
the generation before your time?
It was so that they could calve and then work those, castrate, brand, do all those things before it became warm, April. Certainly before April 1st, they knew that you need to have those animals born. The navels on any animal are the number one source of screwworm. And if you think of navels, you might as well just think of liver because that goes straight to the liver. And so we're talking death within 2 or 3 days
Straight into the
there,
blood supply.
straight into the blood supply. The number one spot infestation, what they call myitis is the term, when you have it, is the navel. And then you go right from there, you go to
To
that cow
ca
who's just had that calf. And so on the cow, that is a
so if
big
she
source.
lapsed, you could pretty much wasn't any sense in calling the vet to stitch her up.
Oh, yeah, no, think
You
about it.
were
If you don't catch that within, first day or so,
yeah.
on those vulvas after calving, and
And I
same with navels on those calves or deer or lambs or goats or whatever those animals are. That's where the devastation, that's where most of the economic loss was in the the newborn calves, newborn goats, newborn deer, all those things. That's where the biggest threat is.
we've mentioned
Oh,
it, on the show before. We had a professor from Texas A&M, and M, and we discussed about how also there was a spillover over than other than just bovine, but it affected the white-tailed deer population. I think that was pretty much what wiped them out
it
in our
wiped it
part of the
out.
country.
It wiped it out. We didn't have any deer. It was in the late 70s, early 80s before we saw any deer in our part of the country,
And
just because of that. Yeah.
what do you feel like? We look back at the generation before yours and before that. I've heard tales about how terrible it was, and my folks maybe we confusing the fly, but they called them warbacks. Are you familiar with that term?
Mhm. Yes.
And about how it would just completely ruin, you know, the leather and hide market.
Oh,
It would just completely. It'd be like what we would know like a bot fly now
yeah,
in the
exactly.
back of it, and it almost looked like a tobacco arbor
Yeah, and
in the back.
they still have those. They still have those down in Panama as
Uh
well.
huh.
I've seen those. I can't remember what the Spanish name for it is. I've spent one reason I got involved too was 12 in 2012 was I'm also a graduate of the TCU Ranch Management Program, and got a call from the guys at TCU and said, "Hey, we got a group of ranchers from Panama in, and they're they're on their way to Austin, but can they come by the ranch and do a tour of the ranch and everything?" And because you know East Texas, where we're at, is probably most similar to their part of the world, as far as forages and Bermuda grasses and all the forages that we have and the rainfall and Brahmin influenced cattle and things. And so said sure. So that group came down, hosted them, and I asked them at the time, I was like, "Well, what are you guys doing in Texas just to cheer?" Well, they said, "No, we're actually here because that facility, the screwworm facility that's in Mexico that was built that we used to eradicate this down, the United States Department of Agriculture wants to give that to Mexico. And we are here to lobby against that because we are concerned that they will not maintain it." So it had just been maintained and mothballed,
And what year
and
would that have been?
it was in 2012. So in 2012, USDA did not listen. They gave that facility to Mexico. They scrapped it, turned it into a military base. And so that was our backup. And that was the concern of the Panamanians at the time was, if you do that, that's our backup, guys. We don't have a backup. And so here we are, now without a backup for that. And we're having to build a facility, and we're building.
Makes me harken back to what administration was there at that time when that
Absolutely.
gifting happened.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. Just as you know what I'm saying. And so, I'll say this too. and I think going forward, and this is number one, when we were lobbying, we spent 2 years ago, 2 years ago, this was on our radar. And so then the answer was, well, how do we stop this? And now that we no longer had that backup facility, where could we build a facility? How big does facility need to be? What's it going to cost? Those were the things that we spent a year lobbying for. And one of the things that we lobbied for and insisted on was that it be built in the United States and that we maintain this from now on until we wipe it out. I mean, look, I don't want to just stop at the Darien Gap now. Let's just eliminate this all the way through South America. Uh, but what we build, we're going to maintain. And so back to it, it is important for our future generations, just like we're talking about, and we understand it's important for us to share this message with our children and grandchildren too, about how important this facility is going to be, and it has to be maintained.
A
So,
100%, 100%. And I think that with the type of science that we have now and our ability to mobilize it, if the USDA or the government wants to get behind something, they can make it happen. And
absolutely.
a lot of times we hear we hear the plan and we hear the theoretical side of it, but we often don't see the implementation or lack of the exposure or light shed on the implementation at ground zero. Can you give us some insight into what the federal government is doing with the USDA in affected areas? Has it been effective, and what do you feel like the results of those plans have been thus far?
Gotcha. So first of all, I'll explain. So the way it works, when it got here, Texas and our Texas Animal Health Commission actually it leads the efforts to control it. And they certainly use USDA, all of USDA's tools, as far, especially on the flies. So the big deal is the flies, and that's what really is going to control it. The state's portion of that is going to be respond to these suspected cases, make sure those samples have been submitted, get the identification. Once you get a positive identification, then making sure that that animal's treated. They come out, they're going to inspect that first premise, try to get all those livestock up. Then within 12 hours, usually uh, the USDA side of that will begin dispersing flies in those areas immediately, and then it's going to be up to the state to enforce basically it's really not a quarantine, it's just a movement control. In other words, you can still move, you can move the next day after you had these. Well, let me back up, you can move within 48 hours, because the movement controls say, hey, you're going to have to use Dectomax or Dormectin, and it takes about 48 hours for that to get into the system, so that if something, you inspect them then, and if you were to miss something with the inspection, that dormectin is going to be your backup, to where those eggs may hatch, but as soon as those larvae start to feed into the flesh, they're going to die. And so it's a two-pronged deal. We're going to inspect and we're going to treat. And so from the USDA side, for the past year, our stakeholders, which when we say stakeholders, every single livestock organization in Texas, whether that's the Texas Cattle Feeders, TSCRA, Texas Farm Bureau, Texas Sheep and Goats, Texas Wildlife Association, Texas Poultry, Texas Pork. I mean, just go down the line. For the last year, we have met once a week on a Zoom call with both USDA, Animal Health Commission, and our Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, because Texas Parks and Wildlife Department is in charge. They're leading the battle on the wildlife side of this. And so for once a week for the last year, we have met with our stakeholders groups have, and we have been able to ask questions, provide feedback, look at the response playbook that they put together with all these other state animal health agencies to say, okay, if you get a case, here's what the protocols are going to be. But within these protocols, I really was really surprised and happily surprised at the willingness from both our state and federal people to work with this to be able to adapt. So this is not just a document that this is the way it is. No, this is a document that, depending on how things happen on the ground, it's some flexibility in the plan because everything is not going to be the same. You know, finding the first case in a dog in the city is probably not the same thing as finding the first case, in El Dorado, Texas, Slacker County, and a 10,000 acre place.
Yes,
They're
sir.
different. And so
It's different. It's different responses to different
right,
whole,
absolutely,
exposure types or land
absolutely,
based types.
absolutely. And so we've been very pleased with the response for USDA. I think they learned the high path. They've learned. We've certainly learned. I know Texas Parks and Wildlife has learned with CWD here in Texas. It's like cooperating with landowners. If you don't come in heavy handed and telling people what they're going to do, if you come in with the attitude, let's work together, let's try to find solutions to this, we get solutions and we find them and we'll do that. And so far they have been fantastic about coming in and working with us as landowners, working with us as groups. I mean, we can raise a question or a concern, and within 3 or 4 days, we've got a response to that. And there are going to movement controls. We have to have the movement controls. We understand that it's not business as usual. If you're in the infested zone, meaning to move, you're going to have to be inspected and treated, but you still can move. Commerce can still happen. And that's been our number one concern, is that continuity of business there can't be lockdowns, because once you start quarantining and lockdowning, then people start illegally moving livestock. And that's
Mhm.
what happened. That's what has happened in every single country between here and the Darien Gap. Is once it got out, then the response of the government was to just lock down everything, nothing can move. And that's not practical for our industry. We have a commodity that has a shelf life that has to move. And so that business continuity, we're glad to see. There's always every week there's another little issue that pops up, but so far we've been able to raise those concerns with USDA and or Texas Animal Health Commission, and we found a solution to work through those issues as they pop up.
I commend Texas and the structure that y'all have in place. It seems like y'all have really risen to match, what we're seeing now, and have really effectively communication is really what it's all about
It
to handle
Yeah,
something like this. You touched on something I want to bring up. I know that Texas is a big state. You're a landowner. And this is what the basis of our show. We're in the land business.
yes, sir.
A big part of our listenership are also are hunters, and that's a big part of land ownership, is
Yes,
the
sir.
recreational side. And I know that Texas has always been big in exotics and stocking different type of huntable game. You have a little bit different than it is in Alabama and Georgia, so to say, as far as with high fences and whatnot. Are there restrictions on the movement of um, those type
Yes.
of
Yes,
uh,
if you're in one of those infested zones and
is applicable?
you're moving exotic animals, or you're moving white-tailed deer, the same protocols, inspection, treatment protocols are in place for those as they are for livestock. You know,
And we've heard for so many, seems like the last 10 years as well about CWD, and it is a real thing. But there's been so many people that try to say that CWD is just a way to hustle or monger fear and to kind of churn the tanks and get things moving. And I don't always agree with that, but I think there is some of that where anything can be taken advantage of or misused. As we all know, it's human nature. People are going to do that, but
Sure.
I think that right now that you've got to put water where the fire is, and this screwworm thing is what we need to get on top of. I'm not saying that recreational wildlife should take a second step for anything, but when it affects the way that we consume and we live, we really have to get hands on with this thing and get a hold
Right.
of it. And
Well,
like
and
I
we
try
think
I try to say, I'm not an alarmist. I just want to bring awareness to the importance of this thing because I grew up hearing so much about it as a kid, and I'm like, if this is the same thing, I don't want any part of it in my part of
right.
the country.
I'm glad you bring that the wildlife side of it up because when you look at economic damage to the state, I think the estimates were, the livestock industry brings in like $1.2 billion a year to the Texas economy, and the wildlife hunting is $9 billion a year.
Mhm.
So it's a big number, and it's look our ranching community would not survive without the deer lease and the hunting and the quail hunting and those things. So it is important, and
It's
so
big supplemental income for a lot of your producers.
absolutely, and
That's what I
while
want our listeners to know is it's just as important to y'all as
absolutely.
combating the livestock, but it does need to kind of take. It's not the
Yeah.
prerogative at hand.
Yeah. Well, we look at it as all together both. And way I see it, and the reason I'll explain it like this: if on the livestock side, I'm doing everything I can on a prevention side. So I have a prevention plan, meaning if I'm going to dehorn, if I'm going to castrate, I'm going to vaccinate. I'm using the Dictamax or the ivermectins, you know, to to keep to keep these sources low for the fly. So if we can eliminate on the livestock side any potential wounds or avenues for that fly to lay their eggs, that in turn is going to benefit the wildlife. The other side of that too is if you report this. So if you have a case of it and you report it, guess what? You are going to have the sterile flies dropped in your area. And those
Explain that
sterile,
to our listeners how that works because
yeah,
I've told it to people, and I've been through the academic and theoretical side, and they're like, "You're crazy. That's not how it works." I'm like, "It's 100% how it works."
100%. If I report a case and they come out and they take the samples and it comes back positive, like say within 12 hours in cases of weather permitting, I will have flies being dispersed in that area. The flies overwhelm the wildflies. So right now we're fortunate enough that the wildfly populations are not real high. We're not talking millions of cases of screwworms like we had in the 50s and 60s before we eradicated. We're talking now we've had 42 cases in the last 6 weeks or so. And so if you get the flies, then that helps protect your wildlife. These fawns that are dropping on the ground right now, the only protection that they're going to have is from the sterile flies being able to eliminate the wildflies life cycle. And so when you do those, the other thing that we have now that we didn't have back in the 50s and 60s, every single deer feeder that's out there in Texas right now just about has a game camera on it. So I can sit here and look at every single game camera that's on a feeder and go through those every day looking for any suspicious signs that it might be myiasis. Bucks are in velvet. As they start to shed velvet, you're going to
And
see
that's
those.
right around the corner, as we talk.
Yeah, it's right. Yeah, so you're going to see those wounds on their head, anything on their flanks. You get to see these animals, and when you do, we have already we've already worked with Texas Parks and Wildlife. So in a case like that, you contact your each county has a game biologist assigned to that county. So you either contact your game biologist or your game warden, and we have what a form, an authorization. It's called an authorization to take. So that would be, I'd be, Robert, here, I'm going to send you this photo of this deer that was feeding at the protein feeder today, and it looks very suspicious. And you, as a biologist, you're going to say, absolutely, that looks like an animal that looks highly suspicious. Let's take that animal. And so they're going to work with us either in advance or at that time to sign an authorization to take that animal. So we're gonna try to harvest that animal, laying down on a tarp so that those screwworms larvae don't crawl off into the ground, because as soon as the host dies, that larva starts crawling off into the ground. And that's where they burrow for 5 to 7 days before they come back up. But anyway, we can take those samples uh, with Parks and Wildlife right there, get those samples in, and so we have some tools. We have drones now, so we have tools to monitor our wildlife that we did not have in the 50s and 60s, and certainly. And so I think that is a tremendous asset to us. While we're taking care of our livestock, we can also be taking care of our wildlife at the same time. It's the same. They all depend on each other, but they absolutely depend upon reporting it first and getting those flies in.
I really appreciate you recognizing that point and clarifying that for our listeners, because it's all about teamwork, between the cattlemen and the hunters, and we're all in it
Absolutely.
together, and we all have a like-minded objective, and
Yes.
working
Yeah.
together is always the best way to be
You
proactive.
you touched on something, and I'm going to go back to it because it really is important. You would have to go back to the early 1960s when all of the Texas livestock organizations and land organizations got together at that time to build a facility and eradicate this thing, to find the cooperation between the Farm Bureau, Texas cattle feeders, Texas Southwestern cattle raisers, sheep and goat, independent cattlemen. We have not had this much unity and purpose as an industry since that time. And that's what it's going to take for each of your states. Your state's going to be no different. Y'all should be having these meetings together as an organization, so you are a united front, both the livestock and the hunting wildlife associations, so that you're a united front, so that you can begin having your meetings with your animal health officials and your wildlife officials and your state governments and those things, so that communication chain is established now, because all these other countries, they didn't do that, and when it hit, they were behind. I mean, we got hit when this thing hit on June the 3rd. You notice where it didn't just come up to the border and fly across the border, and that was the first case, and then from that case, it was kind of a deal. No, this thing jumped 180 miles inside from the border. And
I think it's because you you had your normal business traffic, and
oh yeah,
you
no,
couldn't
I
isolate it.
right. And so you can see exactly. So it's spread, but we got hit in that first 2 or 3 weeks with it being spread and widespread in so many areas that, I mean, it was what do they say? Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the nose. And then, and that's what happened to all these other countries, between here and the Darien Gap. And they didn't respond well. And I think the organization that we have put together was the reason for that. You know what? We've adapted. We've figured out, hey, this is working and that's not working, and knock on wood. I mean, look, we've got 3 or 4 more months of warm weather. That this is going to be a challenge. We've got more flies coming. The Matapa, Mexico facility where they're going to produce 100 million flies. Just now this week is going to be the start of the first radiation on those to sterilize them. And so we're hoping in the next week to 10 days that we've got an additional 30 million flies out of there. And that number will go between 30 million and 100 million by the time we get to October, November.
I
But
have, I noticed that, at least around here, we've had a wetter summer than most, and that doesn't help our cause much
That's
at
what's
all.
happened here. I mean, look, we were in a drought. We needed the rain, but from a timing standpoint, I mean, couldn't have been worse as far as we had a warm, one of the warmest winters that we've ever had on record. And then you throw on top of that rainfall and rainfall in those areas of Southwest Texas. Uh, Really and truly, what this fly, the real climate and the real environment that it loves is going to be the coast of Texas, East Central Texas, all the way to Florida. I mean, it loves that type of environment. Uh, and knock on wood, at least where it's at right now, that environment is probably going to get very, very hot and very, very dry really quickly.
We
And
hadn't seen the hot yet.
that's right. And that will help tremendously uh, for slowing down that natural reproduction cycle of the fly. You know, the threat's still going to be back where I'm talking about in the areas. And if you look back historically, and I think this is going to apply to the Southeast the same way that it applies to East Texas and Central Texas. When you go back to the 50s and 60s, even, the one difference that we have now versus then is coastal Bermuda and all the Bermuda grasses. And with that came higher stocking rates and more cattle. I mean, East Texas was, back in the day was more cotton,
Same
poultry,
way here.
hog, but the cattle production has increased tremendously. It's the heart of our cow herd in Texas. The biggest cow numbers that we have are on the east side of the state, east of I-35. And so that's higher density of stocking rates, smaller producers. And so it's going to be the biggest challenge for our small producers is going to be for the last 25 or 30 years, this has kind of been a passive industry. I mean, you could have an outside job and be in the cattle business and, check your cattle every other
Well,
day, once a week. Now then that's going to change.
The bottom line literally is we really just started making money with this thing.
Well, no, it was. You're exactly right. It was a passive income because
yes, it was. It was. And
no doubt about it. We did it. We did it because we love it. We do it, and that's what we do. But it is going to be a challenge to small producers. The questions that I think that they should be asking, whether they're in East Texas or they're in Alabama right now, is I need to get a plan together, and that plan, I think, first of all, should be, having a relationship with a veterinarian. First of all, that you can call, walk you through all these products, emergency use and conditional use, and watch for treatment, watch for prevention. And in the case that I have my first case, who do I call first? How do we treat it? And those things. And so having that veterinarian and maybe having two, if you guys are like us, we're down to so few veterinarians that actually do large animal work.
that's true.
And you better have two, because the one may be doing surgery or maybe out on a call and can't get to you. So having those numbers, the number of your state animal health organization, your state wildlife people, however that process is going to be, having those numbers in your phone, having a kit with some of these products in it to treat something with the tarp, having all those things in place. And then also understanding this: do I have the facilities to be able to pin something and inspect it and treat it and retreat if necessary?
If you're a big enough operator, you are, but then we get back into the thought of these smaller operators not having sick pens and isolation.
And that's what I'm saying. Even as a small producer, we're going to have to make some economic decisions on whether we're going to be in this or not. And it's scary because I'm concerned that people will just say, well, I'll just get out of it. I don't want to go buy some panels and build a pen and a chute and all those things. I'll just get out of it. And that's not what we need. We need more numbers, not less numbers, to stay relevant. But it is an issue that small producers are going to have to look at. If you're 75, 80 years old, can you do that yourself? Or do you have a neighbor? Do you have a son? Do you have someone younger that can help you do this? Robert, it's going to be back. We're going to get back to the times like we were from the 30s to the 60s and 70s, where we knew our neighbors and we were neighborly. And I think you're going to, for us to get through this, especially even in Texas, if this, for the next few months, it may be getting to know your neighbors. And we have a lot of absentee ownership that live in the large metro areas,
Mm-hmm.
come out on the weekends. And those are the ones that I think would be, if you are a full-time operator and you have neighbors like that, my suggestion has been get to know them and offer, if they do have cattle, hey, I'll come and check your cattle or feed your cattle a couple of times a week, or if you need help treating something, or if you have a suspected case, call me. I'd
Just
be happy
stay
to help.
vigilant. Stay vigilant.
Absolute vigilance is the key.
I
Yes,
tell landowners all the time, especially from a livestock standpoint. Uh, this saying always being that good fences make great neighbors. Well, hey, it don't cost you no more than just to leave a little gap there.
that's
Put you a
right.
gap in
That's right.
and splice it in, and it may save your whole herd one day.
It may, because you're getting it.
Just seeing from a different perspective and a
Yes,
different
sir.
set of eyes looking over the fence may be the person that saves you.
Absolutely. And that's going to be important for producers to understand that message right there, that this is, we're not going to get through this by ourselves. It's all of us. I mean, if if I see a case of it and I'm leery of calling the government, oh, I don't want to, look, it's just natural. I mean, we see it here. I'm sure you see it there. A distrust, and I don't want to get put in a quarantine and blah, 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 and all those things. But here's what you really have to understand, that if you don't report this, it's not going away. It's still going to be there tomorrow and the next day, and it's impacting your wildlife, and it's going to impact you. It's impacting your neighbors. And sooner or later, your neighbor's going to have a case and they're going to report it anyway. But that may be a month or 6 weeks of losses that you could have eliminated by just treating it and reporting it and getting the sterile flies in there and controlling it, so that we get this thing eradicated as quick as possible and get it out of here and go about our business as we were before. And let's enjoy these high prices that we have, and let's not wreck this market.
That's what I've told people that in my passing and at sale barns and discussion, they say, well, what does that have to do with us here? I said, well, if it affects, the Texas cattlemen, it affects the Alabama cow calf operation just the same, because
Yes, sir.
we're all in it together. But we may not feel the effects until next year, but we're going to see it in the market before we actually see it on the ground. I feel like
Absolutely. It's one of those things that we know how this battle is going to end. We're going to get enough flies, by 2028. We're going to have 500 million flies. And by the way, I didn't even mention there's the new technique, which is called the Novo fly, where they're able to just produce male flies only. Because let me back up and explain to everybody. When I talk about releasing 100 million flies a week from the Panama facility, which is what they're doing and what they've been doing, that's actually only 50% male, 50% female. We don't need the females. They don't do anything. We need those sterile males to breed with the wild females. And so this Nova fly, they're able to genetically go in there, and the females will not survive on the diet that they're being fed, and the males do. And so you can double your production. That is a big, big deal. That is a game changer. And in
that's science. That's science loading the
absolutely,
deck.
back to what is USDA been doing? That's one of the things that USDA has been doing, is developing that. So when we get to that point, we know how this is going to end. We're going to eradicate this thing back. But in the meantime, there are things that we're going to have to sacrifice and do in terms of being vigilant and working with our neighbors and having these treatment protocols, and being able to pin something with some cubes. Our cattle are gentle enough that we can check on them. The best preventative tool we have are our eyes. just putting our eyes on these animals. And then that's where a small producer with 15 to 20 head, gosh, especially if they're on your place and you're living there, you could see those things every evening when you get home from work or whatever, just checking on them then, just getting in the habit of doing that. As it gets closer, if this thing does get into your area, then it's time to start thinking about, well, do I really want to put this ear tag in that calf? Because by putting that ear tag in that calf, I've created a wound. Do I want to castrate? Do I want
It's
to
just the small things that you
little
have to.
little things like that as part of that preventive plan that certainly I'm talking about.
And another thing that I'd say is, front pasture cattle are just the same as back pasture when it comes to this. You've got to check them all. You can't just check what's easy to look at.
It's the ones that you're missing is the ones that you should be concerned about, because that's the thing that it's important to understand what this fly is and what it isn't. This is not a swarm of flies like horned flies and hill flies and barn flies. These things are like, they're small in the environment, and they're like lone wolves. And that female, she hatches and she's hiding out, and they love shade. They love along water areas, brush, thick brush and things like that. That's what they love. And she sits there, and that male fly hatches, and how he finds that female in that environment, who knows? But she breeds one time, and then after she breeds, how in the world she can smell after birth or smell blood, miles away, 2-3 miles away in some cases, they say, and be able to find that host and lay those eggs in that wound or in the teardrop. We've seen the last few weeks, teardrops in sheep. They're going to find somewhere to lay those in some warm blooded mountain.
Yes, sir.
And he may lay eggs in one and then lay eggs in another one, and then once you get one case where those larvae hatch and you get a small sore, it just attracts more female flies, and they lay their eggs there. And so if one female egg lays 300 eggs, and those 300 eggs hatch, and then they go and they populate, you can see how quick this thing, you can get to 1 million flies real quick. But it's not a swarm. You're not going to see these around your barn. They're not attracted to manure. This is not something you can put IGR in your feed or in your mineral that's going to work. That repellent is good. Keeping the flies and the ticks off of your cattle is absolutely repellent. That does help. If there's not a tick bite or there's fly bites on these cattle and things like that, absolutely makes a difference. Getting those cattle up every 3 or 4 weeks as it gets close to you, and keeping the flies and the ticks off of them. And especially now that we've had a very, very wet spring and summer, we have a tremendous tick and fly control problem. And so right now it is important to keep those down, but those products are not going to kill the screwworm fly. It's just not.
Mr. Cockrell, I really want to commend you in the time that you've taken to educate yourself and to be a how would I say it, a cheerleader or a proponent for, or an advocate rather, for the eradication of the screw fly. I know it is something that has the potential to create a lot of issues for people across Texas, but across the country as a whole. And I really commend you in your efforts of being proactive and spreading the message and educating others.
Well, I'll tell you what, selfishly, because I'm in the industry, do it. But I'll tell you exactly one reason why I'm so passionate about this was because those same gentlemen from Panama that were ranchers that came to the ranch in 2012. After that, I've had a lot of opportunities to go down there and visit their places and work with them as producers. So I've gotten to know those guys, and 2 of those guys were on that trip in April of 2025. I reached out to them and said, "Hey, can you guys get us into the Copeg facility there in Panama where they produce the flies, because we're being asked, we know we need to build a facility, but we don't even know what a facility looks like. We don't know what it is going to cost. Can you get us in? And they got us in. We were invited to come down to Copeg to the facility, not on the USDA side, but on the Panamanian side, because their cattlemen invited us and requested that we do that. When I left there, said, man, guys, I mean, what can we do? I mean, what can we do to help this? And they said, go back to Texas and the United States and share this message. And don't make the same mistakes that we did. But also, the only way this is going to get eradicated back down to here, and we're going to see a screwworm-free country again, is if the United States takes control of this and makes it happen. Because when you guys decide you're going to do something, y'all take care of it. And that is the message that I've come back with. And that is my goal, not only for us, but to eradicate this thing back down throughout these countries and get it back down there, because it impacts all of us. And we certainly appreciate their willingness to help us help them.
This is one of those situations where I commend Texas in acting as a capacity, almost as a sovereign country instead of a state.
Well, one thing about it, 2 years ago when we started this journey, just like our grandparents did in the 60s, we said, you know what, if we have to build this, we'll build it. But if we build it, we're not going to have anybody telling us what we're going to do. And that's kind of our message to both the state and the federal guys was, we're going to give y'all an opportunity to lead this if you build it and pay for it. But if not, then get the hell out of our way, because we're going to do it ourselves and we're not going to ask for permission. And so we certainly understand that you can't, this is not a spectator deal. You have to be involved as your organizations and as your producers. Be involved, be vigilant, for sure.
That is a great way to wrap our conversation up today, Mr. Cockrell. I on behalf of our listeners and Big Oak Land podcast family, we really appreciate your time and we appreciate all your efforts. And I thank you personally for spending this time, have this informative conversation with me. And I know our listeners will echo me in that accolade.
Well, reach out anytime with any questions or things, and more than happy to help tell you how it's going to go. I mean, there's going to be days we're going to win and there's days we're going to lose. This is with this fly, we don't get to choose the battlefield. I mean, that's we have a worthy opponent for sure in this. And so thank you for doing this, because what you're doing, information and getting this out to your producers, is vitally important in the response. And so thank you for the opportunity.
For our listeners who want to learn more, are there any sites?
Yeah. So screwworm.gov is a USDA site that has a lot of information. Also, the Texas Animal Health Commission, if you want to see where the latest cases are at and keep up with all that, the Texas Animal Health Commission website is a great one. We have, it's a screwworm, screwwormtexas.com is our coalition of all our organizations. But really and truly, the USDA's website and the state's website are pretty good. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of prevention information and things like that on there as well.
Well, thank you, Mr. Cockrell. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
That'll wrap us up for the day.